The third guideline is, when engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. Well, this is just to say, or acknowledge the fact that there are going to be various thoughts, feelings, sense perceptions, noise in the room, people coughing, memories, imaginations, visualizations, sort of dreaming. All of this psychological material, you might say, is going to be flowing down the stream of consciousness as you sit there. And we say that it's inevitable, integral, and normal. So this is a terribly important point to get through our heads if we've been trained in the doctrine of distractions, that distractions somehow are harmful or interfere with your prayer. But it's important not to resist these thoughts. In other words, it's important to have a joyful attitude towards the thoughts, a friendly attitude towards the most dreadful thoughts. Not that you linger over them or act them out, but it's important that we expect them, and they're normal, and they're integral, and so we receive them all with a smile, sort of inward smile, so to speak. A jolly attitude is recommended. Here they go again, that sort of thing. Ha, ha, ha. Reason for that is that any emotional frustration or annoyance or distress or grief is not appropriate, because that is another kind of thought. Because it's emotionally charged, it's more of a hindrance to entering into interior silence, which is the proximate goal of this prayer, than any number of casual thoughts that go by. So as soon as you're annoyed, you have a second thought, which is much more disturbing than the first one. And so there really is great wisdom in taking for granted there's going to be lots of thoughts and endless thoughts, and that with practice you can disregard most of them. Now, the term thoughts is a technical term in our centering prayer practice, and it's an umbrella term. We could have used another term, but this one kind of got stuck, in which any perception whatsoever is referred to. That is, inner and outer sense sensations, memories, feelings, emotions, plans, commentaries. Any perception at all is a thought in the context of the centering prayer practice. That means that every time you are engaged with any perception whatsoever, according to this third guideline, you ever so gently return to the sacred word. Not because the sacred word has some inherent miraculous power of stopping the thoughts. It doesn't. Hence, it's a mistake to use it as a bulldozer or a baseball bat to knock the various thoughts out of the ballpark. This prayer is totally nonviolent. There's no, and in fact, it's as effortless as possible, so that the very term ever so gently means you return to the sacred word with a minimum of activity. Not only that, but this return is the only activity you initiate in the centering prayer. In other words, you do nothing except to return to the sacred word when it's challenged by some attractive or repulsive thought that begins to take you out of the disregard of thoughts. So the whole thrust of the prayer is to stop thinking. Now, this doesn't mean you're not going to have thoughts, but notice this delicate distinction. We're not going to think about the thoughts. So you can have all the thoughts in the world go by and they won't interfere with their prayer. It's only when you start thinking about the thoughts, feelings, that you interrupt your original intention of just being totally open to God, and that calls for some response to reaffirm your original intention and to get back to where you started. Now let's look at the third guideline, which is perhaps the most crucial one for most of us. When engaged with your thoughts, return ever so gently to the sacred word. We said that thoughts are inevitable. We said they were integral. In other words, they're a part of the prayer. And as far as we can tell from our present level of experience, they're integral because your thoughts may be coming from the unconscious and may be part of the process of healing that I'll come to later in my next lecture. As the Spirit works as a kind of divine therapist. And one of the ways that he heals the unconscious is by allowing its feelings and its thoughts to surface, especially during prayer, and then later sometimes outside the time of prayer. But it is precisely the programs in the unconscious, or what psychology calls the dynamics of the unconscious, that hinder the free flow of grace and hence need to be addressed by the Spirit, brought to our attention, and we have to let go of them, both in our prayer and the consequences of them in daily life. So that you can see right away that the centering prayer involves the whole of life and the activity by which we bring its fruits into daily life is almost as important a factor in the project as the actual time that we faithfully spend each day in the prayer itself. Thoughts are a normal part of centering prayer. As I already mentioned, a jolly attitude helps very much. But it works somewhat like this. Suppose you were in deep conversation with someone you loved and high up in an apartment house and the windows are open, the traffic is going by and the noise you can't stop. But all of a sudden there's a crash in the street and the decibels go up and you naturally feel a curiosity to go see what happens. Well, this is what happens when interesting thoughts or boats come down the stream of consciousness. We want to look at them. What are we going to have for supper, and so on. And then as your mind begins to look at this thing, or as, let us say, the young man begins to go to the window to see what the accident was, he suddenly remembers, oh, what am I doing? I'm in this deep cheek-to-jowl conversation, heart-to-heart conversation. I'm not interested in, it's not a time to go see what's happening outside or to judge what we're really going to have for dinner. And so you want to reinforce or reaffirm the original tete-a-tete that you were having. And so what would you do? You would turn your eyes back towards the beloved, your friend, as a gesture of renewing the conversation from where it got somewhat disturbed. Or you might say, excuse me. Or you might say, as I was saying. Well, that's what the sacred word does for you. It's when you are lifted out of your basic intention and start watching thoughts that you're attached to or have an aversion to, that you need to do something to return to the sacred word. But if the thoughts are just going by like noise in the supermarket and you're not paying any attention to it, you're just dimly aware that it's happening, then there isn't a necessity to go back to the sacred word, because you're already at the place that the sacred word is meant to facilitate your reaching, which is the abiding, turning, and resting in the presence of God within you at the deepest level. So let me just sum up very briefly in this modest diagram here what I'm trying to say. Suppose that this is our ordinary awareness, the stream of consciousness that we're experiencing during the time of prayer, And here are a few boats that are going by, boats representing thoughts, feelings, images, and so on. And there's usually a fleet of them. Sometimes the whole United States Navy seems to be going down with all the guns banging and so on. So whatever your experience, you're having thoughts going by at this level. At a deeper level, let's call this the ordinary level of our awareness, and let's call this the spiritual level of our awareness, which you're really not aware of most of the time except at a peak experience or when life or tragedy or something brings you to that place. So we're mostly unaware of what might be called the river itself on which all our thoughts and faculties are resting. So we're kind of absorbed or dominated in our ordinary psychological life by the objects of events and people and our emotional reactions to them. The purpose then of the centering prayer is to move from this level to this level. And indeed, not to stop there, because the human being has greater depths than that, but to move even deeper to the level of the true self, which is our participation in the divine life, and the divine presence itself as the source of our being at every level. And it's accessing or awakening our awareness to this presence that is the ultimate goal of contemplative prayer or centering prayer. But to reach it, we have to pass through the spiritual level and to awaken the true self and whatever of God's ultimate divine presence he may want to share with us, which is a whole new life, which is a transformed life, and which it seems to me is what the gospel invites us to, especially in St. John, where Jesus speaks of inviting us into the same union and unity that he experiences with the Father in the Holy Spirit. Hence, this is so important, again, from the perspective of prayer as relationship. Now, there are lots of prayers at this level, our vocal prayers, our reflections, and our divine office, and the sacraments. But each of these things, especially the sacraments, has this mystical depth, or this mystagogic teaching, which helps us to understand the symbols of the Church from this level, in which they're transformed and their meaning becomes immensely more powerful, more attractive, and more personal, as well as, at the same time, bonding us with everyone else who is having a similar experience in grace. And that, we might say that the centering prayer is primarily involved in awakening this particular level as a preparation for going deeper still, which is the work of the various stages of contemplative prayer and mystical life.